Hello, folks, all who are here already. Welcome to our Balance webinar titled Redefining Wellness in a Weight-Obsessed World, Ditching Diet Culture. We'll be starting in a few moments. We're just going to wait for more people to get logged on, just kind of get everyone a chance. And then we will meet our host, Chloe, and our other moderator, Ekin. Cool, lots of people showing up. This is great. Hello, all. Feel free to sound off in the chat with how your morning's going so far. Morning, Kathy. Morning, Carly. Vanilla latte sounds great. Thanks for being here, Fiona. Morning, Zara. Sarah, welcome from Phoenix. Kathy's on the Connecticut shoreline, pretty close to Chloe. Hello, everyone else saying hi. We have almost 80 people going, so we'll get started for now. If anyone has any questions or thoughts along the way, please feel free to put them in chat. We'll be answering more of them towards the end. So thank you for taking the time to log on today and learn more about diet culture. Just by logging on, you're taking the time and putting some energy into learning about yourself and getting support. So thank you so much for being here. Again, if you have any questions, you can either submit for Q&A or in the chat. We'll be reading out most of them at the end of the webinar. I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Jamie. I work for Balance Eating Disorder Clinic. I'm our marketing coordinator here. And I'll pass it over to our co-moderator, Ekin.
Hello all, I'm Ekin. I'm an intake coordinator here at Balance, and I will be available at the end for any and all questions. And to Chloe.
Absolutely. So thank you both so much for moderating, and thanks so much to everyone for being here. It's so exciting to see everybody turning up this afternoon for our webinar, which is entitled Redefining Wellness in a Weight-Obsessed World, Ditching Diet Culture. So today we're going to be exploring diet culture a little bit, where we see it in our world and how we can start rejecting it and maybe choosing a more health-oriented path. So as Jamie said, my name is Chloe Cerino. I'm a registered dietitian here at Balance. We will be taking most of the questions at the end of our webinar today. You can feel free to drop them in the Q&A or the chat feature as we move along through. And Jamie and Ekin will read them along at the end, and we will get through as many as we possibly can. All right, so our objectives for today: understand diet culture and how it impacts our lives, identify problematic thoughts and behaviors regarding food, discover ways to redefine what wellness means to you, and finally, create an action plan to ditch diet culture. So before we really get into the nitty-gritty of things, what is diet culture? Let's define what that means. So diet culture is a system of thinking that exists in our society and environment that really values thinness over true health and well-being. So rather than really focusing on someone's physical health and other kinds of health, we're really focusing more on someone's body shape and size or physical appearance as being more valuable or more important than their actual health. It places morality on our lifestyle habits, like what we eat and how we move. Morality in this context means, we are a good or a bad person, essentially. There are good ways to move and there are bad ways to move. There are good ways to eat and there are bad ways to eat. So really seeing things in this black and white way and saying some things are good and others are bad. And finally, as we'll see a little bit later, it normalizes disordered eating patterns. So the reality about diets and diet culture. Most people who engage in dieting are, as I would think, engaging in it in order to lead to some kind of weight loss. That is why most people choose any kind of diet that they engage in. And while this is the primary goal of most people engaging in diets, we really know that it's better associated with weight gain or weight cycling than it is with weight loss. Now, we're not saying that weight gain is in any way a bad thing here. We're just noting that diets do tend to be associated with it. And we'll go into the next slide a little bit more of what weight cycling is and what it means for us. So people who engage in dieting are often affected in various ways beyond weight gain or weight cycling. So for one, they oftentimes have slower metabolisms. And the reason for this is that basically our bodies get used to the idea that maybe we won't consistently have access to adequate nutrition. So in doing so, basically our bodies learn to say, we need to slow down the rate at which we're using this nutrition that's coming in, because if we use it too quickly, this really could be all that we're getting for the time being. So in order to more strategically use the energy and the food that we're giving it, we really have to slow down the metabolism in order to burn through that less quickly. So while this can seem like a really efficient thing, it tends to kind of backfire in a lot of ways, because then when we do start eating more adequately or more consistently, our metabolism remains slower. So it's using basically the energy we're giving it a lot less efficiently and really burning through all of that a lot more slowly and not as effectively as it naturally would have if we didn't engage with the diet. Another way that people who engage in dieting are affected is that they have actually an increase in ghrelin, which is a hunger hormone, and a decrease in leptin, which is a satiety or a fullness hormone. So again, the reason for this is that we are basically telling our bodies that we don't have consistent access to adequate nutrition. Our bodies don't know that we're engaging in a diet. All they know is that it isn't being fed to the extent that it needs to be fed in order to have enough nutrition. So our bodies learn to say, when I do have access to food, I really need to drive up that desire to eat, that hunger. And I really need to drive down the desire to stop eating or to get full. So therefore, when we have access to food, I need to eat a lot more and I'm going to be hungrier in order to feel that fullness, because this very well may be the only time, at least for now, that I have access to this nutrition. So we really need to capitalize on this moment. People who engage in dieting or any kind of restriction often find themselves constantly thinking about food, which I think is a really interesting one. Our bodies get really savvy at sending different kinds of hunger cues when a rumbling stomach is being ignored. So oftentimes people who are dieting are learning to say no to their hunger cue, the rumbling stomach hunger cue. And so our bodies learn to say, well, maybe if we constantly think about food, they'll find a way to get it. They'll find a way to get access to food. So people who are dieting often are thinking constantly about food, reading cookbooks, following accounts on Instagram that are about recipes or food, and so on and so forth. And finally, we know that diets rely mainly on external cues rather than internal cues to guide food choices. So this means that different diets have different rules for us, right? For example, intermittent fasting is one that I'll bring up. The external cue there is saying you can eat, but only between say the hours of 12 and 8 p.m. So instead of saying, I woke up in the morning and I'm hungry for breakfast, we're saying it's not time to eat yet because this diet is saying I can only eat between these particular hours. So we're not really using our internal guide and our own intuition to dictate our food choices. So what is weight cycling? This is something I had mentioned on the last slide. So weight cycling is this yo-yo experience of losing and regaining weight while engaging with diets. So we know that diets do tend to lead to some amount of weight loss for a period of time when you are following them, and then they're not particularly sustainable over the long term. So inevitably, we're going to go back off of our diet and maybe eat normally, or maybe even experience some overeating. So essentially, our body, as I said, has gotten really savvy with using the energy we give it efficiently, slowing down the metabolism. It also has increased our hunger and decreased our satiety hormone. So essentially, it's very easy to regain any amount of weight that was lost during the diet. So beyond just that, weight cycling has been associated with some pretty alarming stuff. So higher rates of binge eating, higher rates of psychopathology, meaning any kind of mental health concerns such as anxiety or depression, lower life satisfaction, which I always think is a really interesting metric that they have. And finally, increased risk of death from certain diseases, including heart disease, diabetes, and a few other chronic diseases. So weight cycling is actually better associated with poor health outcomes than being in, a higher weight body, which is what mainstream diet culture really is telling us is the problem. So we actually have really solid evidence to show that that is not the case, and that dieting can lead to these poor health outcomes. So where do we see diet culture? I think the answer to this question is pretty much everywhere, but to dive into it a little bit, currently diet culture is being masked in a really sneaky way as the wellness industry. Oftentimes we'll see the word wellness, or I'm on a wellness journey. And that tends to be really interwoven with diet culture and certain diets. So just to dive a little bit into where we see diet culture, a big one tends to be social media. So we see influencers on Instagram, for example, saying, this is what my body looks like. And if you want to look just like me, then you have to eat and exercise exactly how I do. And I will show you how to do that. When in actuality, we know that even if we all ate and exercised the exact same way, we would all still be in very diverse bodies. So that's not really accurate information, but it's feeding into this idea that to look a particular way, we need to do particular behaviors in order to achieve that, even if it's not actually attainable, or it would be detrimental to our health to do so. We see advertisements, right? So the algorithms on these social media sites get really, really intelligent in knowing that if we spend even a couple of seconds viewing an ad for some kind of diet product, or even looking at that influencer who's trying to sell a fit tea or whatever it is, they're just going to pump that content out to us. They want to show us more of what we want, and especially they want to sell us what they think we want. So that's just getting more and more out on our feeds. And finally, inaccurate nutrition and movement information out there on social media. All the time, we have clients who are saying, I saw on social media that XYZ does whatever it might be for my health. So like apple cider vinegar is one that comes up a lot, I think. And this tends to be touted really, really prevalently on social media in such a way that makes it seem like maybe this miracle cure for any kind of ailment. And there isn't a whole lot of information there as to where these people who are posting this on social media are getting their evidence. So we don't know that what they're saying is based in any kind of real research or evidence. And this could be anyone saying really anything about any kind of food or any kind of movement or other health or lifestyle choice. So we really have to look at these things with a critical eye and wonder where these people are getting their information and how valuable and how accurate the information truly is. Next up, in one that tends to be a big problem, is the healthcare system. So often our doctors and other healthcare providers are using research that might not be the most up to date. And this makes sense because we're being educated in a system that it takes a long time for current research to make its way into our education system. So if we're learning with this outdated research, then that's the healthcare that we're receiving. BMI also is still used to assess health, even though we know now that BMI really isn't very valuable in assessing, especially individual health. BMI was invented almost, I believe, 200 years ago by a man who wasn't even a doctor, trying to look at population health, and he was looking only at white men. And now we try to extrapolate it into the population as a whole. And when we're thinking about BMI, I always encourage people to think about if anything ever has so many loopholes that make it inaccurate, we should really look at it with a questioning eye. So for example, BMI, we know we can't really use it very valuable for pregnant women because the weight that they're carrying is not all their own. We can't use it for athletes because they have such high muscle mass. So there's too many of these times that we can't use it that really make it valuable to assess health as a whole. So just something interesting to think about. There's also pop culture where we see diet culture. So when we turn on the TV or when we watch a movie or even read a book, there really is a lack of representation of diverse bodies in the media that we consume. So oftentimes the bodies are thin bodies and able bodies and so on and so forth. And so that just even subconsciously becomes what we see as the norm. We start to see that as the ideal body or just the normal body, as I said. So then naturally we start to see anything outside of that as not the norm or not what we should be striving for, essentially. So that tends to come up quite a bit in pop culture. And there are some television shows, et cetera, that are starting to increase the representation of more diverse bodies. But by and large, we are still seeing this lack of representation. And finally, interactions with friends, family, colleagues, and other loved ones. I think we can all think of a time that we were spending some time with family or friends and someone, made a comment about being bad for eating a particular way, or saying that they're on a new diet, or saying that they are following a new exercise plan. And all of these things really are sneaky ways that diet culture find their way in to our day-to-day lives. And these tend to be places that are a little bit harder to stand up against diet culture, because maybe we do feel like we don't want to cause any kind of confrontation among our friends and family. But we'll talk a little bit later about drawing boundaries and how we really can navigate those situations a little bit. So just a resource I wanted to share with everybody, which is along the lines of diet culture in our healthcare industry. There's this really interesting website, amazing resource, that's Healthsheetscom. And they have a bunch of these health sheets that are talking about basically descriptions and causes and treatments of different disease states that are oftentimes treated differently by healthcare providers, whether their patient is in a small body versus a large body. So the example I pulled up here is type 2 diabetes. And really it's just talking about what causes it and how do we treat it in ways that aren't just losing weight, essentially. Because we tend to see that individuals in larger bodies who go to see the doctor for type 2 diabetes are told one thing, when individuals with smaller bodies who have type 2 diabetes might be given a completely different treatment. So we know that it is treatable through means other than weight loss. So I encourage everybody to check out this website if you're interested. So what are the costs of diet culture? So I've broken this down into a few different elements. So first is the financial cost. So the diet industry is a $70 billion industry, which means that they are selling us quite a bit. And diet products are substantially more expensive than regular products. So something like a loaf of bread, for example, just a standard loaf of bread maybe is $2.50 on average. And if you're trying to get this diet bread or keto bread or whatever it is, it's really closer to the range of $7 to $10 a loaf. So we're spending a lot more money on trying to engage with these different diets. And they're making a whole lot of money off us too. Next is the health cost. So as we said, dieting is associated with weight cycling, which can lead to a number of different diseases and poor health outcomes. And also, diets have been shown to preclude disordered eating and even full-blown eating disorders. So of course, that's a big cost to our health. And finally, the lifestyle costs of dieting. So we know that people who are engaging in dieting are oftentimes thinking about, their food choices they have to make and how they're going to fit in their gym class or whatever it is. And it's just taking up a lot of what we call brain space. It's just taking up a lot of, mental energy and space thinking about these things. We also know that it's really difficult to engage with social plans and different events when we're dieting. So for example, this past weekend was the 4th of July. If we're engaging in a diet and our friend or family member is having a cookout, it might be really challenging to attend that event because we know that the different foods that are going to be there may or may not be aligned with the different diet that we're on at that point. So it really can take a lot from us in all of these different aspects of our lives. So I always like to point out the contradictions within diet culture. So for starters, the recommendations are constantly changing. So we know that every few years a new diet comes out and there's something new that we're supposed to be doing. So just as a few examples, in the 90s, I think some of us remember this low fat diet craze. So this is when, Olestra or lean was a big product. We were trying to get in as little fat as possible. And then in the 2000s, we see the Atkins diet and South Beach diets becoming a lot more popular. And this is the exact opposite. So this is a high fat and high protein diet with very low carbohydrates. So, okay, we have to make this complete switch. And then more recently in the 2010s, we see things like the Whole30 coming out and intermittent fasting gaining popularity. And of course, some of these other diets continue through the time span, but some big ones in the 2010s were these two. And this is saying you can really eat from any food group you'd like, but there are these rules and restrictions. So you have to eat super quote unquote clean, or you can only eat during this time frame during the day, but you can eat whatever you want during that time frame. So with these recommendations changing all the time, it really should make us question whether they have any any value in the first place anyway. There's also news headlines that are often making these really substantial claims, which again, aren't always based in solid research. So if we turn on any like morning talk show, oftentimes we'll see some breaking news headline with a new research study that came out about the health benefits of whatever it was that week, apples, it could be coffee, it could be chocolate. And we very rarely in these news stories are getting the actual information about what this study was looking at and who the participants were, how many participants were in this study. And so we don't always know if the research that this is based on has any real solid ground to stand on. Sometimes it does, but other times it doesn't. And we're really looking at this, as a news headline and great, okay, apples are good for me. I'm going to go get some apples at the store right now. So we're really missing a critical piece here of what this research is based on. And I always like to point out the irony of processed foods. Diet culture is always telling us that highly processed food is bad and we should avoid it at all costs. And then on the flip side of things, we know that virtually all diet foods are highly processed. So there's these keto cookies or even like any of the diets that send you food in the mail. They're all these highly processed foods. And I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with eating highly processed foods as part of your diet, but it's this really significant contradiction between don't eat it unless it's a diet food. So again, something we have to look at with a critical eye. All right. So normalized disordered eating. So many pieces of quote unquote advice from diet culture are actually things that are associated with disordered eating. So when we screen people for eating disorders or at least disordered eating, we actually often ask about if any of these diet behaviors are part of their lifestyle because we do know that they are associated with disordered eating. So some examples that we see often, drinking water before a meal. So if you have a glass of water before a meal, you won't be as hungry and therefore you'll eat less. That's something that's a disordered behavior. Only eating during certain times of the day. So again, very similar to intermittent fasting, for example. eating in a particular order, like eating your vegetables first. That tends to be a little bit associated with the drinking water before meals, right? If we're getting in the fiberful, filling vegetables first, maybe we won't be hungry towards the end of our meal when we've saved the less nutrient dense foods. And so therefore they get excluded from the meal. Eating very slowly or putting down the fork or your utensil for long periods of time between bites. We know, again, this is a disordered eating behavior, but something that's very normalized as part of diet culture in an effort to either get too full to finish the rest of the meal or simply not have time to finish, for example, your lunch during your lunch break. And finally, blotting foods like a slice of pizza, the oil off a slice of pizza. That is, as we know, a disordered eating behavior and something that is super normalized in our current society. So food is meant to be enjoyed. Diet culture really leads us to believe that food is the enemy and that we should absolutely ignore our hunger and that hunger is something that's scary. Oftentimes, I hear clients saying that they have been ignoring hunger for so long and only listening to it when it's absolutely painful and they can't physically ignore it any longer, to the point that when they stop engaging with dieting and they are trying to honor their hunger a little bit more, a little earlier, they're afraid, right? Because they're used to hunger being this really scary and often painful experience. When we know that hunger is something that has a pretty neutral feeling when we're listening to it early enough that it's not this really dire need to eat immediately. Food is meant to nourish us, of course. That is the primary role of food, right? Is to give us nutrition, but it's also meant to be enjoyed. Food is by nature social and emotional. We can't possibly be at any kind of celebration usually without there being food there. We can't celebrate someone's success without having like a cake for someone's retirement, for example. So food and social and emotional aspects really are naturally interwoven, and we should enjoy it. And I also like to point out that many other cultures around the world do choose to honor food and the experience of eating. So if you go have dinner, if you're, visiting another country and you go have dinner, oftentimes it's this really beautiful, lengthy experience of enjoying the food and taking your time to eat and eating with your loved ones, rather than this like quick grab and go, just get in the food because I have to, and get the meal over with kind of mentality that often we do see in our current society. So how do we start to combat all of this? So intuitive eating, which maybe some of you have heard of, maybe some of you haven't, is sometimes called the anti-diet or the opposite of dieting. So while, just like we talked about, all of these diets are telling us what to eat, when to eat, and how much to eat, intuitive eating really works to turn those cues to eat back inward. So listening to our own hunger and fullness and satisfaction, cravings, all of that good stuff to tell us what we're in the mood for, how much we should eat, when we should eat, and so on. So while intuitive eating is based on hunger, fullness, and satisfaction, it's not a hunger and fullness diet. This is a place that sometimes newcomers to intuitive eating get a little bit tripped up. For example, if we're at a birthday party and we have our dinner with our loved ones to celebrate the birthday, but then the cake comes out, for example. Maybe we got full at dinner, but we want a piece of cake. And if we're trying to follow this hunger and fullness diet, we say, but I can't eat past fullness. I'm not allowed to eat past fullness. When in actuality, we know sometimes it is natural for us to eat a little bit past fullness for the sake of satisfaction. So maybe we do grab that slice of cake and we eat as much of it as we want. And then we move forward, knowing that there will be cake again in our future and that this isn't the only time we'll have the exposure to it. So intuitive eating has been shown to reduce the risk of certain chronic diseases. Two examples are diabetes and heart disease, increase self-esteem and life satisfaction. I think those are two really great ones. Increase dietary variety as well as fruit and vegetable consumption. There's actually some really new research on how intuitive eating increases fruit and vegetable consumption. We know that people who are less rigid about their food choices probably not engaging with dieting, do have more diversity in their diet. They're choosing different foods from all kinds of food groups over the course of the day, over the course of the week. And since all of these different foods have different micronutrients like vitamins and minerals, they are getting a really well-rounded diet more often than not without having to follow any really rigid rules. And finally, intuitive eating has been shown to reduce the risk of disordered eating and eating disorders, which are really, really wonderful things, of course. So I'm not going to go into what the 10 principles are in too much detail right now. At the beginning of the year, I actually had done a full webinar on the 10 principles. So I invite everybody to head over to our YouTube channel, Balance's YouTube channel, and check out that webinar if you have more interest in learning about these. But as you can see, intuitive eating is split into 10 principles, starting with reject the diet mentality. So that's what we're really working through today. And a bunch of principles exploring hunger, satisfaction, fullness, how we cope with our emotions, how we view our bodies, and finally, movement and gentle nutrition. So the principles are aligned in an order in which they're meant to be followed or really learned and incorporated into our lives, because we know that, for example, movement and gentle nutrition are two things that are very often co-opted by diet culture. So there's a reason that those two things are coming last, because really we need to make peace with food, explore our hunger and fullness, and so on before we might feel ready to tap into our relationships with movement and with gentle nutrition. So how do I know when I'm ready to start intuitive eating? This is a question I get all the time, especially from individuals who are in recovery from an eating disorder. So we know that listening to hunger and fullness, as well as satisfaction, are two big things in the intuitive eating process. And oftentimes, since dieters or people who have had eating disorders have ignored their hunger and fullness cues for some time, it can be challenging to listen to them and to use those as the only guide of when to eat. So oftentimes individuals might be on a meal plan with a dietitian or something along that line. So I always like to kind of explore what we can do in intuitive eating now versus what might come later in this process. And of course, just as it takes time to learn and internalize diet culture and see certain foods as good and other foods as bad, it takes time to unlearn it too. So this isn't something that just happens overnight. It's something that takes some time and some energy. And if we trust the process, we can unlearn it. We just have to be a little bit patient with ourselves sometimes. So what can we start on the earlier side of intuitive eating? So certainly, because it's principle number one, reject the diet mentality. Call out diet culture when you see it. So again, that's kind of what we're exploring today. What is diet culture? Where do we see it? And what can we do if we do see it? Start by noticing your hunger, fullness, and satisfaction during meals and snacks. So I always like to invite clients to start just by noticing, not having to say, I'm going to eat to my hunger and fullness, but just when it's time for a meal, noticing where my hunger is and noticing where my fullness is after the meal. That way we have that really valuable data that we then can use as a guide of when to eat, when to not eat, and maybe what food we're in the mood for, so on and so forth. Create a list of things you're grateful to your body for. So principle 8 is respect your body. So of course it comes quite late in the 10 principles, but we can start by just thinking about what we're grateful to our bodies for. For example, I'm grateful that my body told me that, I needed some rest and let me get a good night's sleep. I'm grateful that this past weekend I could run around with my nieces and my nephews in the backyard. Those are all things that are wonderful that our bodies provide to us that can really help us push towards at least some semblance of respect for our bodies, even if we're not quite ready to reach a place of like absolute body love or anything like that. So really decreasing the pressure around this. And finally, gaining exposure to more diverse bodied individuals in the media that you consume. So in TV shows, podcasts, social media accounts, movies, books, and so many more things. As I said, we tend to see a very limited variety of bodies in the media that we consume. And so if we can start saying, I'm going to choose to follow social media accounts that expose me to a more broad variety of individuals, we really are undoing that normalization of a thin body being the ideal body or the norm body. exposure really does do a great job of normalizing things for us. So the more we can expose ourselves to diverse things, the more that we're finding, that it becomes more normalized and et cetera. So some things that might come later, and this is where people who are new to intuitive eating often are saying, I'm only going to eat when I'm hungry and I'm going to stop when I'm full. And that's not what we need. Really, we know that using hunger, fullness, and satisfaction might be the main guide of what, when, and how much to eat. But there are also things down the line that we start to incorporate into this too. So for example, going into a work meeting, and I'm not physically hungry just yet, but I know that my work meeting is an hour and a half long and falls over my normal lunchtime. So I'm going to choose to have something to eat before I'm physically hungry, for example. So that comes a bit later in the process of learning our cues, trusting our cues, and knowing that sometimes we have to be a little bit flexible with these things. And also engaging, as I said, with gentle nutrition and possibly reintroducing movement or exploring your relationship with movement. Those are principles 9 and 10. There's a reason that they fall last, because diet culture, as I said, tends to co-opt these things the very most. So it might take some time and some patience to really feel ready to explore our relationships with these things. So rediscover real wellness and what it means to you. So I wanted to bring in this concept that's from the Intuitive Eating book that's exploring authentic health. So the way that the two authors of Intuitive Eating describe it is that authentic health is really this integration between inner attunement and external health values. So inner attunement is how we view our own health, our own thoughts and feelings about health in general, both our own and other people's. And our own physical sensations arising from our bodies. So hunger and fullness might be two of them. Others might be the need for sleep, when we feel like we want to engage in movement versus when we need a rest day. A few examples there. And some external health values might be health policy, which we know certain parts of health policy are great and other parts we do have to question a bit. But certain things like the USDA food guidelines telling us that eating plenty of fruits and vegetables is, generally speaking, a health-oriented behavior. That is true. And if that's something that we want to consider for ourselves, that might bring us to this place of authentic health. And finally, also looking at our own philosophical preferences around our eating patterns, like eating vegetarian for animal rights or choosing to follow a kosher diet for your religious beliefs, for example. So when we're really integrating both of these things is when we can reach this place of authentic health. If we're saying, I need to only follow my plate, for example, but we're not listening to our own cues, maybe what we have on our plate, even if it is a perfect example of a my plate, it might not be where our hunger and fullness is at that day. It might not be listening to what our bodies are craving that day. So really, one without the other isn't serving us in a place of reaching this really authentic health, which is individualized for each person. So health at every size is something that we touched on really briefly when we looked at those Hayes health sheets earlier. But I do think that it is important for us to talk about at least briefly here. Again, there's another full webinar on health at every size on our YouTube channel, which was by Danny Bryan and Melanie Rogers, one of our therapists and our founder, which I encourage everybody to check out if you want to explore these principles a little bit further. But there are 5 principles of health at every size. So the first is weight inclusivity. So accepting and respecting the inherent diversity of all body shapes and sizes, and not seeing any as good, not seeing any as bad, and not seeing them as associated innately with health. We can't tell somebody's health just by looking at them. Second is health enhancement. So supporting environments and policies that really do help us foster a place of health. Eating for well-being. So this has some overlap with principle 10 of intuitive eating, which is gentle nutrition. So choosing foods that are nutrient dense, as well as listening to our own satisfaction around meals and our hunger and fullness. Respectful care. So this is both in our healthcare system and just broadly speaking, right? Everybody, regardless of their body shape or size or any other attribute about them, deserves respectful care. And it really explores how we can get to that place. And finally, life-enhancing movement. So again, there's some overlap with intuitive eating here in principle number 9. It really allowing everybody to choose the level and types of movement that feel good to their bodies. Movement is something that many people do choose to engage in, but movement isn't going to look the same for everybody. We don't all have the same preferences there. So this is something that certainly does tie into the real wellness side of things, right? So instead of the wellness industry being a guise for diet culture, all of these principles, I think we can agree, are great and health-oriented goals that maybe some of us have. Oops. So in diet culture, there tends to be this big emphasis on physical health, right? Eating a particular way, moving a particular way in order to, they say, reach a place of physical health, but really it tends to be the strive for thinness or to look a particular way. When really there are so many more aspects to our health. So for example, mental health, social health, and spiritual health are 3 things that are incredibly important and just as important often as our physical health. We can't really have any of these without the rest of them. So I always love to encourage clients to think about if a choice they're making does align with all of these aspects of their health. So if they're saying, I was thinking of taking a rest day at the gym, but I just can't bring myself to do it because I don't think that's aligned with physical health. And, really taking this opportunity to say, okay, is it aligned with your mental health? Are you feeling like you do need a break, and a break is going to be the best thing for your mental health that day? Are you going to be missing out on social plans just to go to the gym for this one day? Or the social plans may be more important. Maybe it's someone's graduation or something really exciting is happening. And if we're missing out on these things in order to engage with a behavior, it may be more falling along the lines of diet culture than it is real wellness. I don't know why that keeps happening. All right, so some small steps to start ditching diet culture. So the big thing that I think many people like to start with is just cleansing your social media feed. So unfollow accounts that don't make you feel good about yourself. Your social media is yours, and you deserve to feel good when you log onto your Instagram account. So unfollow accounts that don't make you feel good, and do follow accounts that inspire you to be aligned with your true values. We'll talk a little bit more about values on the next slide too, but if we're finding that every time we log on to Instagram or a different social media account, we're just seeing things that don't make us feel very good, chances are there are some accounts out there that are more aligned with what you want to be seeing and what you want to be exposing yourself to. So if we can just do a little exploration to find those when we log on to our Instagrams in the morning, it's going to really make us feel positively and make us feel good instead of feeling badly. Again, considering the diversity in the media that you consume. So recognizing if there is a lack of representation in the media you're consuming, and if so, how can you expand the diversity in the media that you're choosing to engage with? Standing up to diet culture when you see it. So I think we've all been at maybe some kind of social function, maybe a family function, and somebody has said, oh, I'm so bad for eating this particular way, for example. And if we are feeling up to it, can choose to really stand up to that and say, hey, you're not bad for eating that way. You chose to eat that way because it was what tasted good to you that day, and because it was going to nourish you in ways, really meaningful ways. And so, no, you're not a bad person for eating that way. And then shifting the conversation, what are you up to this weekend, for example? So we don't have to choose to just stand by while diet culture happens around us. Identify your values and compare them to those of diet culture. So again, I'll show you some examples on the next slide. And finally, read Intuitive Eating by Evelyn Tribole and Elise Resch. That is the book that really dives into the 10 principles of intuitive eating. I always encourage everybody to take a look at that if they're interested. So I wanted to include this values list that actually is something that we came up with as a group in Balance's last intuitive eating group. So when we go through principle number 1, reject the diet mentality, we talk about our values and diet culture's values, and if there's any overlap between the two. So our last group came up, this is an abridged list, but some of our values were honesty, kindness, fairness, equality, and love. I think those are all really beautiful things. And then some of diet culture's values were things like vanity, quote unquote, willpower, this never good enough mindset, and money. So I always encourage people to think about, if they're trying to decide if they want to engage in a certain behavior of any kind, is it really aligned with your values, or is it more aligned with diet culture's values? So again, going back to the example of, do I want to go to this class at the gym, or do I want to spend the day with my friends and family? Which of those things is going to be more aligned with our values? Is it falling more under, this vanity and willpower, never good enough mindset? Or is it more aligned with, these other values that we probably hold? So just something to get curious about and explore a little bit. So create an action plan. I think it's always a great starting place to just create a mental list of where you see diet culture in your own life. So I gave quite a few examples as we moved through this of where you might see it, but there are other places in your life too that maybe it stands out to you even more so. So just creating that mental list, it really gives us the chance to see what we're up against and how we can start creating a plan against it. Find your allies. I think this is such an important one. Everyone around us, if we take a step back from this, everyone around us in society mostly is engaged, at least to some extent, with diet culture. So really what we're doing here is choosing to say, I'm not going to do what a good portion of society is engaging with. So this is something that if we can find our allies and people that we trust who are also ready to at least question diet culture, we really have that great social network to start leaning on a little bit. While we question these things. So I also want to point out that your allies might be friends and family, but it also can be your team members, like your therapist, if you have a dietitian or even a doctor. Sometimes those will be your allies as well. Learn to draw boundaries. So learn basically where you want to draw the line as far as diet culture goes. If I am at a social event, do I want to let my aunts and uncles or cousins or whomever talk about their recent diet? Or do I want to say, this is something that I choose to not engage with. And if this happens, I'm going to remove myself from the situation. I'm going to choose to divert the conversation to something else. So really drawing your boundaries and trying to keep them as often as possible. Again, identify what your personal values are and how they compare to those of diet culture. Engage in self-care. I think this is such a big one. So we are, as I said, standing up to a good part of what society tells us about health. So while we're doing this, it can be stressful at times and it can bring up a lot of emotions. So it's important for us to at least, to some extent, engage in self-care as much as we possibly can, and doing things that make us feel good. And finally, be really gentle with yourself. This is a process that takes time. It's not something that happens overnight. And if you do find yourself still having thoughts about diet culture every now and again, that's okay. That's normal. And as we continue to work through it, it will become, less and less as we move right along, but really being gentle with yourself along the way. So I do just want to mention that our next intuitive eating group is starting in a few weeks. It's a 12-week course that takes place on Thursdays at 6 o'clock Eastern time. And it's completely virtual on Zoom, so you can be located anywhere. But the intuitive eating group, we explore the 10 principles of intuitive eating and how they relate to the lives and experiences of our group members. And then there's a introductory and a wrap-up week to kind of cap both ends of it. So if anyone's interested, I'm sure Jamie and Ekin are going to put in the chat a way you can get in contact with us at Balance. So that's about all I have for today, and I would love to hear what questions are coming in.
Amazing. So first question for you. How can someone live free from diet mentality when they're struggling with health issues like diabetes too? And similarly, if people have various illnesses, does this mean that they're actively participating in disordered eating, or is it okay if it's done for health purposes?
Yeah, so great questions. So the first one about chronic disease, we know that intuitive eating can be supportive to those who have chronic disease too. So a big part of intuitive eating is just learning what feels good to us and what doesn't in terms of food and other health behaviors that we engage in. So some people truly do have dietary restrictions based on certain chronic illnesses, and that's okay. That's not diet culture, and that's not anti-intuitive eating. What that is really just listening to what our body needs. So everybody has different needs. And if you're someone with a chronic disease, say for diabetes, and you're questioning, your carbohydrate intake, for example, it's really a matter of what here is going to make me feel best in my physical health, my mental health, my spiritual health, and so on. So we can be opposed to diet culture in the regard that it's this drive for thinness over true health, just because we're choosing to do these behaviors, whatever they might be, because they truly are aligned with your health. Now, if you find yourself saying, I'm going to the gym because I'm trying to lose weight or change my body shape or size, that's something that would be more aligned with diet culture. And while you still may choose to go to the gym in order to help alleviate a certain health condition that you have, we'd really want to do some exploration work around why you're going to the gym, and if there are other forms of movement that maybe feel better to you that would be equally as beneficial to your health, for example. So we can have both at once. We also know that intuitive eating has been shown to decrease overall stress, which decreases cortisol levels in our blood. So this is something that I go into a little bit more in the original intuitive eating webinar I did. But cortisol is something that is really closely correlated with chronic disease, just because if we're in this period of constant stress. So if we can even get less stressed about food, just this one aspect of our lives, our overall cortisol is going down, which is productive as far as our health outcomes go. So I hope that answered the question. But that's what I have for now.
Awesome. Another question. So someone said that they were always under the impression that slow eating was a healthy behavior. What makes it a disordered one?
Yeah, great question. So people do naturally eat at different paces. Some people are naturally slower eaters, and that's okay. But sometimes when we are choosing to eat really slowly, for the sake of, really feeling our fullness before maybe it would have naturally come, or to specifically run out of time to eat. So for example, if we have a 30-minute lunch break and we're choosing to eat really, really slowly, we might not have time to complete the meal, even if we are physically hungry and even if we haven't eaten enough. So that's where we can see it being a disordered behavior. Not necessarily for everybody, but definitely something to think about if you do find yourself eating more slowly than you naturally would want to.
For setting boundaries, but in a more specific example, how would someone deal with, the Peloton fitness challenges and some diets and households when they're trying to focus on health at every size and joyful movement and, not to come off as insensitive?
Yeah. So everybody is the expert on your own body. We are all the experts on our own body. So you may be living with people who are choosing to still be engaged with diet culture. And while that can present a host of challenges, that is anyone else's prerogative, and it's hard to sometimes see our loved ones engaging with this when we know the reality of it. But really what we can do is say, I'm the expert on my own body. I know that I don't want to do a Peloton challenge. I know that, even though my roommate is doing Whole30, that's not what's going to make me happy and healthy. And so I'm just going to choose to say, you know what? You can go ahead and do that if that's your choice. But I know for me that that's not the most health oriented behavior for me. So it doesn't have to be this really confrontational thing as much as it is just, this is my choice and that's your choice. And I hope that your choice is going to make you as happy and healthy as you expect it to, and kind of just draw it there.
In response to how diet culture relates to spiritual health, someone said, I have a patient who feels she must fast for 40 days and 40 nights to address her spiritual health. How do I reason with her?
Yeah. So oftentimes this is something that we see from time to time. In eating disorder recovery, we always encourage clients to talk with those in their spiritual community about their struggles alongside the way they understand their own spirituality. So, for example, there are certain religious holidays that encourage fasting as well. So, not necessarily 40 days and 40 nights, but for individuals who are trying to celebrate their religious holiday, and it's a fasting holiday, and they're in eating disorder recovery, we encourage our clients to talk to their rabbi or their pastor, or whatever it is, about that holiday and say, I want to celebrate this holiday. It's meaningful to me, but I know that for me right now, the most health-oriented behavior might not be engaging with that. So how can we reconcile that difference, and where can we kind of find the middle ground there? And more often than not, the religious leaders or the spiritual leaders are saying, you are engaging in this journey right now. In the future, we can explore if you'll be ready to fast again. But for the time being, that's not something that it sounds like will be the most, health promoting choice for you. And they want to help you, right? These are people who want you to be your very best self. And it's hard for us to be our very best self if we aren't nourishing ourselves, especially when we're in recovery from something like this. So I guess I would say, encourage your client to talk to her spiritual community about this and see, or if you can get permission from them for you to speak with their spiritual leaders to kind of see if there is any flexibility there, and kind of take it from there. That's a challenging one.
Yeah, definitely. In response to unfollowing social media accounts, is it reasonable to keep accounts that also challenge a person's views so their feed doesn't become an echo chamber?
So yes, I would say that's always a good idea, right? We should have diverse perspectives on things. So it's not an echo chamber. But if it's something that consistently makes us feel really badly about ourselves, right? There's like one particular influencer who you follow who's constantly saying, do this 30-day, whatever challenge it might be, and you feel really down on yourself anytime you see them posting because you're not engaging with this and it's not your values. We can unfollow those accounts in a really specific way to have a diverse perspective while still making sure we're listening to ourselves and still making sure that our social media is serving us rather than harming us.
In response to an action plan against diet culture, can you give real life examples of how you've stood up to diet culture and tips for how we can do that too?
Yeah, I love that question. Great example. So I think a big one, oftentimes we do see diet culture coming up in our own lives, as I said, right? It's at the family and friends events. So I do think that as often as you feel up to it, really drawing the boundary with friends and family by saying, someone comes up to you and they say, oh, I just started Whole30 or whatever it is. If you're not in a place that you want to really listen to that day, you don't have to. You can say, that's awesome. And again, going back to this, we're all the experts on our own bodies thing. That's great for you. And like, what else are you doing this weekend? Like, again, really, we just don't have to engage with it. We often think that we have to be so interested in anything that our friends or family bring to the table, when sometimes it's just detrimental for us. So just really choosing to say, good for you, and I'm going to go do this other thing, or let's talk about something more interesting than our body shapes or sizes. I think increasing the diversity of the media you consume is a big way to stand up to diet culture, and just noticing your own diet culture thoughts as they come up. So say you're trying to choose what you want for lunch and you're finding yourself saying, I really should have a salad today. I had whatever it was last night for dinner. No, is that what I'm in the mood for? Or is that diet culture telling me that I need to eat a particular way and that, it's going to change my body shape or size? Maybe you are in the mood for a salad and that's fine. But if you're choosing to have the salad for a reason that isn't just listening to your own cues, then maybe we can start to think about not just choosing that choice.
Totally. For recovering dieters hoping to regain their health, can the damage be undone? For instance, can the metabolism recover, hormones regulate, etc.?
Yes, very excitingly, yes. We know that our bodies basically get confused, right? That's what I was saying a little bit at the beginning, that they don't trust that they will have consistent access to enough adequate nutrition. So as we move through this process, as I said, oftentimes people who are early in eating disorder recovery will be on a meal plan. And if that's not you, just trying to engage with a structured pattern of eating, basically we're reinforcing the idea to our bodies that no, you can trust me to eat consistently, to get in enough nutrition, so on and so forth. And as your body regains that trust, it'll learn to say, okay, we can start to speed up the metabolism and reach that point of homeostasis again. We can restore our natural hunger and satiety hormone levels and all of that good stuff. It does come back. It's something that may take some time, but it's something that does come back as we start to refeed ourselves.
Do you have suggestions for teaching intuitive eating to children? This can pose as an issue when parents are in charge of mealtime and the kids are normally encouraged to clean their plate.
Yes. So we know that everyone is born an intuitive eater. So we are born, I mean, if you think about a very young baby, they really know how to ask for food when they're hungry. And they know that when they are full, they push away the bottle or whatever it is. So we know that everyone's born an intuitive eater. So as often as we can discourage the clean plate club mentality, that's really helping our children stay intuitive eaters. At the end of the most recent edition of Intuitive Eating, which came out last year, there's a chapter on teaching intuitive eating to children. So I would encourage you to check that out if you have more specific questions.
And do you have any recommendations for resources about self-image, body image, and just how to nurture that mindset of acceptance?
Yeah, definitely. So I think the intuitive eating book is a great starting place. There are some other books that come to mind, like Christy Harrison's Anti-Diet. She also has a podcast called Food Psych. That's a great one to listen to. I'm not sure if we're planning on sending out resources after this, but if we can, then I definitely can include a broader list of resources. If that's something, Jamie, can we do that?
I think we definitely could.
Yes, we can definitely include it in the email going out.
Okay, cool. So I will include some more resources for you all to check out if you're interested in exploring that further.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah, and Ekin, we can keep taking questions. We totally understand that some folks might have to leave, this being the lunch hour, but we seem to only have a few more, and these are great answers. So anyone who would like to stay can stay. And we will, like I said, have a recording of this. I'll drop that link in the chat now to our YouTube channel, as well as some other resources while we take these last questions.
Yeah, a few more questions. So someone asked how to respond to someone who believes their intuitive eating caps at 900 calories. In other words, how would you help a patient in that situation eat more?
Yeah, so in that case, it's likely that either we're not listening to our hunger and fullness cues, or our hunger and fullness cues are skewed, because we know that that is a pretty significant level of restriction. So no one's adult body would be adequately nourished at that extent. So I would suppose that I would encourage that client to steer maybe away from the principles of intuitive eating that are asking us to listen to hunger and fullness if they are having a challenging time picking up on their hunger and fullness, or if they're finding after just a few bites of food, they're getting really full. Those are great signs that we're not in a place that we're ready to listen to our hunger and fullness cues and use them as a guide. So if we can try to say, hey, let's work on mealtime structure in trying to get in X number of meals and X number of snacks during the day, that's helping us get to the place that we can use intuitive eating more as a guide. But it sounds like, based on what you're sharing with me, that we're not quite ready for that yet. And that's okay. We're getting there. But yeah, I would say that that's not quite intuitive eating.
Mm-hmm. And from the same attendee, how would they be able to support a client who may need to lose weight but is extremely restrictive?
So I guess I would wonder why this client needs to lose weight. If we're operating under the health at every size or HAES principles, we know that weight and health are not necessarily correlated. So we can't tell somebody's somebody's health just by looking at them or by their body shape or size. I would instead encourage you all to check out the Health at Every Size principles, and maybe explore with your client how they can engage with more health-oriented behaviors without having weight loss be the primary goal of their pursuit towards health.
Great. And one final question. If you have suggestions on how to support people in shifting their mindset from that diet and restrictive relationship to a more balanced, healthy one.
Yeah, so great question. And this is one that I hear clients all the time who have bought into this more like anti-diet side of things, really just saying, I wish everyone in my life saw it the way that I see it. And the reality is some people are going to be ready to hear it, other people aren't. So we want to try to gauge the level of readiness of those around us. Some ways that we could, if we think that our loved ones are ready to hear it, are presenting them with the research of, how health at every size and how an anti-diet approach really is more aligned with health than dieting is. Encouraging them to check out some of the resources I'll send along. One that's coming to mind is Body Respect, which is written by one of the authors who pioneered health at every size. And really just, again, gauging people's level of readiness, providing them with resources if they feel ready. And if they don't feel ready, just, again, remembering that you are the expert on your own body. You can make the choices that feel best for you without having to do the same thing that your friends and family are doing, and giving yourself the self-care you need to maybe recover from a diet-focused conversation with one of those people, if that's something that's coming up for you.
Cool. I think we'll finish up there. I'm looking at these last second questions in the chat. I think we've covered most of this. Maybe just one more question on, I guess, I don't know, we kind of covered boundaries, but any direct responses to family or friends' comments about the size of our bodies?
Yeah. So again, trying to gauge the level of readiness that a family member is to hearing that. But if someone is commenting on yours or their own or someone else's body size and trying to correlate it with health, just trying to say, we actually know that not health at every size, that we can't tell somebody's health just by looking at their body shape or size. And we know that health-focused behaviors really are a better indicator of health than someone's body size is. And maybe pushing them to check out HAES or pushing them to check out books like Body Respect, as I had just mentioned. So if, there's the really strong possibility that they're going to say, oh, but that's not what my doctor said. And really just, trying to open up the door to the conversation, or at least open up the door to being able to provide them with resources to maybe hear a different perspective.
Beautiful, thanks. And I think that covers a bit of the other questions we were having. A lot of them were on just kind of specifics of the diet culture and that sort of thing. So anyone looking for some resource on that, the HAES Health at Every Size site that I posted in the chat earlier was great for that. I'm posting one more time, just resources for all of you to contact us. Thank you all so much for stopping by. This was a beautiful webinar. Thank you so much, Chloe, for hosting us and getting us in tune with our bodies. There are lots of opportunities to get in touch with us or take advantage of treatment. If you'd like to speak with our team, you can book a free consultation call. That link is in the chat. That will be with our admissions team, and they can answer any questions you have about the recovery process or diet culture, or where you stand with insurance, and you can pick any time with them that they're available this week or next. Like we said earlier, Chloe leads a nutrition group on intuitive eating, and it's starting soon. That link is also in the chat. And we have webinars like this every single month. You can check out the calendar, again, link in the chat, or you can also look at recordings on our YouTube channel, which I've also put in the chat. And finally, you can always call us directly at 212-645-6903. You can leave a message any time of day if you don't catch us during the workday. We hope everyone had such a beautiful week. Lots of thank yous and good vibes to Chloe coming through the chat. We really appreciate you all being here. Thanks so much.